News crews already circling the courthouse, your primer on what to expect in what could be one of the most momentous weeks in our region's political history. Meet the new sheriff in town, plus thoughts and prayers. America's cliche becomes a local art exhibit. And we're exactly 6 months to the midterms, as good a time as any for a status report on our bi-state's top races.
Week in Review is made possible through the generous support of Dave and Jamie Cummings, Smithfield Foods, Haas and Wilkerson Insurance, and by viewers like you. Thank you.
Hello and welcome, I'm Nick Haynes. Can't we make this an hour-long show? So much to go through in what has been another extraordinary week of news in our metro. Rolling up their sleeves to make sense of it all, the Kansas City Star's chief political correspondent Brian Lowry, from KCUR News reporter and the host of Missouri State House Blend, Brian Ellison, Star columnist and editorial writer Dave Helling, and pitch contributing writer Barbara Shelley, now also being seen and heard reporting for your favorite public radio and public television station. Now, what is the busiest piece of real estate in all of Missouri and Kansas this week? What about the small patch of concrete outside a St. Louis courtroom where news crews from here and all over the country are now camped out to capture the every move of Missouri Governor Eric Greitens? Next week marks the most pivotal week in the governor's political career. On Monday, he will appear inside that St. Louis courtroom to begin a criminal trial on a felony invasion of privacy charge. He's also been charged on a separate count of felony computer data tampering, that charge stemming from allegations he used a charity donor list to solicit money for his campaign. But is this trial starting Monday only about the invasion of privacy charge, Brian?
We, first of all, don't even know if it's going to start Monday.
Okay.
Because at the pace jury selection is going, they are struggling to, get through all of the jurors, which is a big deal to find a jury pool that has not been influenced by the months and months of media coverage. So the jury selection is probably going to stretch into Monday. Maybe we'll start the trial Tuesday, maybe even Wednesday. But it's going to be, obviously, have huge political ramifications, and it's going to be tough for the politics not to enter the courtroom. During the first day of jury selection, the questions that Greitens' attorneys were focusing on: where do you get your news from? Asking people their thoughts of the governor. A woman was excluded because she criticized one of the governor's campaign ads. And so there's things like that it's very much tied to the months and months of coverage, the governor's campaign before he was even governor. It's going to be tough to keep politics, I guess, out of the courtroom, really.
Will the governor take the stand himself, Brian Ellison?
His attorneys have said he will not. That's not unheard of in criminal defense situations. But it does raise an interesting political question for the governor. One of the things that he has said over and over is that this is a political witch hunt, that this is the product of people who are out to get him politically. He has not offered much of a self-defense in terms of the actual accusations, other than to say that he did not blackmail the woman with a photo. If he isn't taking the stand in his own defense, will he ever say that? Will he ever stand before citizens, voters, or jurors and deny that this happened? His political problems, I think, Nick, go beyond what happens in this trial, and everything he does has to play into that larger calculus.
Even if he did take the stand, though, Barbara, we wouldn't be able to see it on videotape. There's no audio recordings allowed, and I also noticed there was not even photographs that could be taken inside of the courtroom.
Well, that's right. Yeah, there's a blackout on that sort of thing. It doesn't really surprise me to hear the governor's lawyer say he won't take the stand, because he does not like to go unscripted, and I'm sure he'd be fine with his own lawyer questioning him, but under cross-examination, he won't do news conferences. He wants to stay on script all the time. Although if he doesn't take the stand, that sort of sets up, to me, a rather intense examination of this young woman who they're not allowed to call the victim in the courtroom, Nick. The judge has said that. She never filed a police report. She can't be the victim, but she is a victim because they're going to be talking about her sexual history, her psychological history. They're going to use her name, and she never asked for any of this.
How long can we expect this trial to last, Dave?
The projections have been about a week, which would mean that if it starts on Monday, it would end Friday, just at the time the state legislative session, regular session, is coming to an end. I think it would be good for all of us, Nick, to stay focused on the actual legal case involved here, which is a charge of invasion of privacy. The prosecution, as far as we know, still has no picture, does not have the picture of this alleged incident in the basement. That you don't absolutely have to have that if you have a credible witness, in this case, the woman at the center of the case. If Greitens chooses not to testify, it will be her word against not his. And so he's really in a bit of a legal corner to some degree. He's never denied taking the picture. He's denied taking it for blackmail purposes. If he doesn't testify, one could see a jury determining that he doesn't want to explain what actually happened in the incident involving invasion of privacy. All the other stuff is important, but not relevant to this particular case.
If the governor is acquitted of the charges against him, though, Brian, would that take the wind out of the sails of that new session taking place on Friday?
Not completely, because you got to keep in mind that there's this completely separate investigation that deals with these campaign finance issues, where you had the state's attorney general, a Republican, say that he had uncovered evidence of criminal wrongdoing committed by the governor. You have this separate felony charge against him. So there's still going to be a strong push. And as Dave got to, there's going to be a lot of gray. You know, it's the question of will the governor be acquitted? Will he be found guilty? There could also be a mistrial, which leads to, which will just continue that he said, she said narrative. In fact, even this morning, it actually came up in court that they're doing this forensic examination of the governor's phone. They still have not found any evidence of the picture yet, and the governor's attorneys are trying to shut down that examination of his phone. So
I'm sorry.
It's kind of going to be this complex thing in trying to prove that he took a picture. The prosecutors wanted to have experts testify on the sound an iPhone makes and things like that, and the judge said, no, no, no. So it is going to be, as you say, really down to, can this woman present a compelling narrative?
But the other thing to keep in mind is, Nick, in terms of the impeachment process, is her allegations about being hit and forced into oral sex, that does become relevant in the impeachment process. Remember, that came out through the House committee investigating the governor. And those allegations then would presumably, if the House votes impeachment resolutions, would go to the Senate where they could be heard. They're less relevant on the invasion of privacy
The last time there was an impeachment proceeding in the state of Missouri that was successful was in 1994, which removed the then Secretary of State Judy Moriarty because she backdated her son's filing application for an election. That process took 2 months. If we were to look at that, in this case, that would take us into July. Brian.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. You know, that case included Chip Robertson, who was one of the Supreme Court judges at the time who ruled and removed Judy Moriarty from office. He's now special counsel for the House Investigating Committee that will hold the governor's fate in his hands. You know, the other thing that is significant about that case, Nick, is that it involved conduct of an official while they were in office. I've talked to a lot of lawmakers, especially Republican lawmakers, who, as appalled as they are about the allegations involving the woman that is at the subject of this trial, they're more concerned from an impeachment standpoint about this second case, this computer tampering, this idea that the governor may have directed the transfer of this donor list from his charity to his campaign, raised money with it, and then lied about it on an ethics form. If that is the case, they say that is a clearer ground for impeachment than the personal conduct that happened before he took office.
We should also state that the threshold of evidence for impeachment is much lower than in a criminal court, where it's
clear and convincing evidence rather than beyond reasonable doubt.
Okay, we will be tracking that next week as that trial gets underway and that special session next Friday. This week marks the 6-month point before Election Day. It's a good time to take stock of the state of play in some of our region's most watched races. In Kansas, the 6-month mark didn't spell momentum, but a culling of the herd in the Kansas governor's race. One of the top Democrats quits the campaign Why is House Minority Leader Jim Ward abandoning the race, Brian?
Well, if you look at the fundraising, he was a guy who entered the race seen as the front runner in a Democratic field. It's one of the first time Democrats have had a primary. It's the first time Democrats have had a primary since 1998, and that wasn't much of a primary since Fred Phelps was one of the Democratic candidates in that primary. So really, you have to go back to 1990. Ward came in with a lot of buzz as the minority leader, the head of the Democrats in the House, but he couldn't raise money. He couldn't keep pace. He was in the race for months, didn't raise any money. He's struggled to get his message out, and Democrats need to find a candidate who can compete against, most likely, Chris Kobach in the general election and with Greg
So
Warren.
what does this do to the rest of the field in that Democratic primary, Dave?
Well, remember, Jim Ward got into the race before Laura Kelly did, or he knew that Laura Kelly would get in. Once she entered the race, it changed the calculus for everyone. She has the backing of Kathleen Sebelius and others, and was the instant front runner, and that's, I think, why Jim dropped out.
But she is a state senator
from
Topeka, but she's not viewed of as a very charismatic personality, talking to groups and things like that, right, Barbara?
Well, I have heard that, and I think that's right. Although, you know, she's highly respected, she's super smart. You know, I think we would expect her to get better as the campaign goes on. And then, you know, you have Josh Zabati out there in western Kansas as a pretty strong contender as well.
And Carl Brewer from Wichita may have some constituencies in Wichita. That might jumble it a little bit, but Laura Kelly is clearly the front runner now.
But not well known outside of Wichita. I mean, I think the question of charisma is a really interesting one. What do voters want at this moment? I mean, we have a charismatic president by many measures. Chris Kobach is charismatic by a lot of measures. If Kansas voters decide they are looking for something very different than those options, Laura Kelly, with her experience and with the wide respect and relationship she has, might be exactly what they want.
The office of governor is currently in Republican hands, and they want to keep it that way. Secretary of State Chris Kobach and new Governor Jeff Collier are the big names you hear about, but there are 8 candidates running, including a handful of high school students, the state insurance commissioner, and a businessman from New York who doesn't even live in Kansas, who at this 6-month point has the most momentum. Brian Lowry?
It's right now, I think it may even be more than 8. If you go on the Ethics Commission website between the two parties, we're well over 20 people who have campaign committees. But the race it's really a 2-man race right now in the Republican field between the sitting governor, Jeff Collier, who took the oath of office earlier this year to replace Sam Brownback, and Chris Kobach. Right now, you know, you can kind of weigh them both. Collier's been able to tap into that old Brownback fundraising network, has been a little bit stronger there. He's trying to present himself as the steady hand. But Kobach is the one. If you go to these GOP events, he's struggled a little bit fundraising-wise. He's had some stumbles. He's had some national embarrassments. But he's the one who can rev up the GOP base at these primary events.
Chris Kobach wants the widest possible field because while he has great support in the party, there may be a ceiling to it, 25–30% in a primary. If it's a 1–2-person race, Jeff Collier and Chris Kobach, then I think Collier may well be the favorite or a slight favorite, only because even Republicans are reluctant, particularly in our area, in Johnson County, to sort of revisit the Sam Brownback years, and they may think that Chris Kobach is more of a possibility in that regard than Jeff Collier. But if it's a wide race, if it's even, then I think Kobach is the favorite.
The Kansas 3rd District congressional race is also getting attention, including these new attack ads against the seat's current holder. There are 7 Democrats vying to stop Kevin Yoder getting reelected, but there's not a week that goes by that you don't see some organization praising Yoder for his help on one bill or another in the letter section of the Star. He's praising President Trump this week for removing the United States from the Iran deal. And at a recent summit of political science professors in Topeka, it was argued Yoder remains the likely favorite, but that was 2 weeks ago. And they say 1 week is a long time in politics. Is that still the case, Barbara?
That 1 week is a long time in
politics?
No,
that Kevin Yoder still is the favorite in this race.
Well, you know, I don't know how to answer that because I know there's a lot of discontent with Kevin Yoder. I think once the Democratic primary takes place and that field coalesces, we'll have a lot better idea of how that's going to play out. Kind of depends what happens there.
Does anybody have a clearer indication?
No, I've said all along I think Kevin Yoder is the favorite, largely because of the unknown quality of the Democratic field, and that Yoder hasn't made really any significant mistakes. In fact, there was a very telling picture this week on Twitter involving Congressman Yoder and Congressman Emanuel Cleaver, who attended the Royals game together, wearing Cleaver-Yoder shirts. I mean, that, you know, that gives you some indication that maybe the Democrats still have work to do if they want to be competitive.
Which I'll note, which one of them was promoting it?
Yeah,
it wasn't Cleaver
okay,
who was trying to show everybody he was at a baseball
But he was
game
wearing the
together.
shirt that said Cleaver-Yoder, and that says something about Democratic strategy in that
I think a lot of it depends on whether the Democratic Party in Washington decides to
Correct.
fund whoever emerges as the Democratic candidate here. And money's going to play a lot of role there.
Now, over in Missouri, a new poll names Claire McCaskill as the least popular senator in the country. The Missouri Democrat just returned from a Beverly Hills fundraiser featuring former President Barack Obama, and that unleashed a new campaign ad from her Republican opponent, Josh Hawley, or his likely Republican opponent. It's called Hollywood.
Now McCaskill's gone Hollywood, hobnobbing with Obama and the Hollywood elite at a swanky Beverly Hills fundraiser. Hollywood is bankrolling McCaskill because McCaskill supports their extreme agenda. Gun grabs, taxpayer-funded abortion, even rejecting the legitimacy of Donald Trump's presidency. If Hollywood stands with McCaskill, how can McCaskill stand with Missouri?
McCaskill is firing back with her own ads, touting the 50 town halls she's held across the state, mostly in politically hostile areas for a Democrat. As we're now at that 6-month mark before we head to the polls, is the momentum for or against Claire McCaskill winning re-election? Brian?
Nick, if there's one thing that is true about Missouri politics, it is that you should never count out Claire McCaskill. There has been, over the last generation, no savvier or more clever political candidate when her back's up against the wall than Claire McCaskill. Think about 6 years ago. Think about Todd Akin. Not just that he made a misspeaking moment on television, but that she supported him as her opponent in that race so that she could fight against him. Josh Hawley is no Todd Akin. I think that's fair to say. But I think Claire McCaskill has a plan here. I think she has a way of moving forward through especially the difficulties that Hawley is facing with Eric Greitens. Hawley's in a very difficult position to on the one hand, satisfy the Republican base that might still be standing with Greitens to some degree, and on the other hand, distance himself from Democrats who want him to push.
Does what's happening to Governor Greitens, though, hurt Josh Hawley, Brian?
Absolutely. It completely complicates it for him. Obviously, he has taken steps to hold Governor Greitens accountable with his investigation. Now, of course, Democrats point to other things he's done and say you haven't done enough to hold him accountable. But what Brian has alluded to is there is still a strong segment of Republicans that support Eric Greitens, and they're not necessarily very happy with Josh Hawley right now. So he needs to find a way to make sure he still has those people on his side and that they don't just stay home. He did a kind of strange thing where he had a press call about the poll that showed Claire McCaskill to be so unpopular, and one of Brian's colleagues from public radio pointed out to him, it didn't poll you against her, so it didn't give us any data about how Josh Hawley stacks up against Claire McCaskill.
The other thing to keep in mind is that Josh Hawley, to the extent he has to deal with the Greitens situation, he isn't able to get any daylight on the campaign. He can't go out and talk about foreign relations or tax policy or Obamacare. He's spending all his time defending or explaining his actions involving Eric Greitens, and it's going to get worse before it gets better.
But he's had plenty of news ink about his fights against Facebook, fights against Google.
None of it's made much of a difference, I must say.
That's right. He's had ink, but I'm not sure that really is going to traffic all that well for him. But that ad that you just showed, I mean, I think that's going to play well for him.
You know, some of his signature issues are things like human trafficking, and those are signature issues for Claire McCaskill as well.
Right, and
so
the go-to argument for Republicans in this midterm will be cultural issues. They'll be talking about things like guns and abortion, rural versus urban. That's what that campaign ad is all about, and Josh Hawley is particularly strong in that area. That's why the McCaskill people may be concerned.
3 weeks after Jackson County Sheriff Mike Sharp resigned in scandal, there's a new sheriff in town. County leader Frank White announcing Darrell Forte is the county's new top law enforcement official, at least on an interim basis. Forte resigned a year ago as Kansas City's police chief. Of all the people who applied, why Darrell Forte, Barbara?
Well, you know, I'm actually not surprised they selected him, although there was, you know, an inside candidate and also a highly qualified woman, retired police major Rosalind Allen, who also were finalists. You know, Darrell Forte is always surprising. You know, he just kind of abruptly announced, you know, what was it last year, that, oh, I'm not going to be police chief anymore and I'm going to go to law school, and he disappears for a while and now he emerges as sheriff's candidate.
Is there a downside to him as the sheriff?
Well, it's a very different job than being police chief, and the challenges will be different, and he will be running for re-election as opposed to being the chief of police. But it's hard to see it as a bad selection. I mean, he does have experience in law enforcement. He's reaching out to people in the sheriff's department. But I do think that Barb raises an important point. There was a highly qualified woman candidate. That will be interesting to see in the primary. I think she is running, or maybe
she's
not running.
No,
so,
there's another woman, though, who is running.
Right, so that dynamic may play out in the primary. Remember, Darrell Forte is only the interim sheriff, and
so that's really just a 7-month period of time
until the new one is elected in August and then in November.
But he has announced that he is going to seek that sheriff's office on a more permanent basis.
He has. Remember, the sheriff's job is an administrative job primarily in Jackson County, and Jackson County sheriffs have a real problem with diversity. There are 94 sworn deputies, 90 of them are white. There are no Asian, no Latino deputies. Darrell Forte has experience dealing with trying to make a force more diverse, and I think that's one of the things he brings to the job.
This Sunday marks the deadline for petition gatherers to submit signatures if they want to add a statewide question to the ballot in Missouri. Last week we mentioned there are 4 different marijuana measures competing to get on in the November ballot. It also looks like the minimum wage is coming back too. The organization Raise Up Missouri turning in more than 120,000 signatures to the Secretary of State's office to raise the minimum wage to $12. The current state minimum wage is $7.85. By the way, in Kansas, it's less, $7.25. Only 7 states pay less. We often hear from viewers about this very, very issue, Brian, but can you imagine voters saying yes to increasing the minimum wage this November?
It's always going to be a tough sell, because there will be a strong campaign against it, trying to argue that if you do this, this is going to lead to other economic downsides. But one thing it will definitely do, I think it will be a very competitive race, is it's going to help bring people to the polls, which could very well help Claire McCaskill. Not to go back to the previous segment, but this is going to motivate voters in places like Kansas City and St. Louis who maybe aren't happy with everything Claire's done lately, but do want to see a minimum
But several
wage
things have
increase.
happened since then. One is we've got a huge reduction in the unemployment rate in the United States. So actually companies are actually paying more because they're trying to find workers. And number 2, I see that Kansas City has just enacted a living wage registry where you can put a slick sticker on your business saying, I pay more than the minimum wage. Does that take some of the attention away from the need for boosting the minimum wage, Barbara?
Well, it's maybe something that, you know, businesses and opponents can use as an argument. Although minimum wage ballot issues have proven popular in recent years, other states have passed them. Interestingly, the governor passed up on a chance to move that to the August ballot where there'd be less turnout for it. Yeah.
Could you also be voting on term limits in November as they wind down their legislative session, lawmakers in Missouri pushing a constitutional amendment to double the amount of time lawmakers can serve? Currently, they are limited to 8 years in the House and 8 in the Senate. I find it interesting that Jackson County officials just announced they're putting on the ballot box in August a measure enacting term limits. Why are Missouri lawmakers proposing the reverse, Brian?
Well, one of the things Republicans and Democrats agree on in Jefferson City is that term limits have not been great for the quality of government that emerges from the legislature. It takes too long to learn the procedures, to become experts in the material, and by the time they get it figured out, it's time for them to move on. It also sets up these battles between representatives as their terms expire, now competing for 1 Senate seat among 2 or 3 of them. I think a really interesting piece of this legislation, Nick, is it's pretty modest. It doesn't really remove term limits. It just says you can serve all 16 of your years in the House or in the Senate. But here's another interesting thing about this legislation. It resets the clock on all of the current people serving and all former members of the House and Senate. So if you are in the legislature now, you're in your 15th year of service, this passes, you've got 16 more years.
It's become one of the most cliched phrases in our vocabulary. Many of us say it when there's a big tragedy, even a small local one. You'll hear it from politicians, and oftentimes your friends and neighbors say thoughts and prayers. A new art exhibit opening Friday in the Crossroads takes up the phrase, in the words of the artists, to be a commentary on our current culture, politics, and values.
Today, I'd like to take a moment to again send our thoughts and prayers.
I want to just take a moment to say that our thoughts and prayers are with all of the people.
And we send our thoughts and prayers.
I can only say tonight that the prayers of the American people are with you.
Just want to extend our thoughts and prayers.
My father was shot on the plaza in the late 70s and paralyzed from the neck down. In 2010, my husband was driving to work and he's at the stoplight at 8:30 on a Monday morning. There was 6 men with guns drawn and 2 people got shot dead right in front of him. He could have been shot. I think the job as an artist often is to reflect what's going on in our life, our community. I had no idea that my zip code was the killing zip code, and this was the 5th most dangerous city in the country. But we have 3 murders a week. Some weeks we have a child killed once a week in this city.
July 6th at the Weinberger Gallery in the Crossroads. If people are so concerned, though, about guns, why is that no one is collecting signatures to try and pass gun restriction legislation at the ballot box?
Well, people know that Missouri and Kansas the legislatures are vehemently pro-gun. A lot of Missouri's laws are constitutional amendments, which makes it harder to overturn with a citizens' initiative.
Even though Washington, Oregon, and California have done just that to enact new measures.
Yeah, but those are different kinds of legislatures.
Just quickly, you have to gather signatures throughout the state. There are geographic regulations involved, and gun control is not popular outside the 2 areas.
And that is our Week in Review. Our thanks to our news reviewers. I'm Nick Haynes from all of us here at KCPT. Thanks for spending part of your weekend with us.